An Apache girl was abandoned by her stepmother on a scorching Texas roadside, cast aside simply because of her bloodline. She thought the whole world had forgotten her, until Chuck Norris drove by and stopped. From that moment on, her life changed forever. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and stick around, because the next part will hit even deeper. You're not my daughter. You never were. You're just a filthy little Apache. Now get out. The door of the truck slammed hard enough to rattle the windshield. Eliza didn't wait for the dust to settle or the tears to fall. She just climbed in, shifted into gear, and pulled away with a jerky grind of the tires. The red road stretched behind her like a wound across the land, and the little girl she left standing by the side of it didn't chase her. She just stood there, 8 years old, hair in 2 long black braids tied with fading strips of denim. Her skin sun-dark, her eyes wide, cracked with dust and disbelief. She held a limp cloth doll with 1 button eye and a missing arm. The doll's body was made from her real mother's old dress. Maggie Bell Hart didn't remember much of that woman's face anymore, but she remembered her hands, warm, calloused, steady, nothing like the ones that just pushed her out of a truck and drove off. Mama. The sound came out strangled, more breath than word. She took a step forward, 1 foot still trusting that what just happened couldn't have happened. Mama, wait. I'll be good. I'll be real quiet. I promise. But Eliza never looked back. The truck shrank down the road, a silver flicker in the heat waves, then disappeared behind a rise. Maggie's breath caught in her throat like she'd swallowed a stone. She blinked hard once, twice. Then the first tear fell. No, no, Mama, please don't leave me. She ran forward a few steps, feet slapping against the dirt, then stopped short, chest heaving. There was nothing to chase, just the sun beating down like judgment and the wind pushing against her like it wanted her to fall. She dropped to her knees right there in the gravel and cried. Loud, broken sobs. Not polite tears. Not quiet, hiding kind of crying. This was the kind that clawed at the belly. The kind that made your bones feel empty. She pressed Clara, her doll, against her face like it could muffle the pain. Mama don't want me 'cause I ain't white, she whispered, rocking. She said I got devil blood. That I was born dirty. A buzzard circled high above, casting a slow-moving shadow that passed over the road, then over Maggie's small, shuddering form. She didn't know how long she sat there. The sun had shifted by the time the rumble of an engine pulled her up from her knees. She squinted, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and stood up slow. A truck was coming. Not Eliza's. Bigger. Older, dark blue. Dust kicked up behind it like a signal flag. The truck slowed. The brakes gave a soft squeal as it pulled onto the shoulder. The engine clicked as it cooled. The door opened. A man stepped out. Jeans, boots, faded red flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, tan face under a straw hat. He walked like someone who wasn't in a hurry. Someone who'd seen too much to startle easy. His beard had more gray than brown. His eyes were small and sharp, steady on her. Chuck Norris. She didn't know his name, not then. Just that he didn't flinch when he saw her. Didn't look away like others did when they saw the braids, the skin, the Apache in her. He stopped a few feet from her, crouched down to eye level. You hurtin', girl? Maggie blinked, swallowed. Her lip trembled. She left me, she said. Who did? My mama. My Eliza. Chuck looked up the road, then back at her. Your real mama? Maggie shook her head. No. My real mama died. Eliza, she don't like Apache. Said I wasn't hers. Said I'm half wild. Chuck was quiet a moment. The wind passed between them. Then he asked, "You got any kin?" She shook her head again. "Ain't nobody else." He nodded once, like he'd already decided something long before he got out of the truck. "You eatin' today?" She hesitated. "Just a piece of bread this morning," she said. He stood. "Well then, I reckon it's time you had something better." She stepped back, clutching Clara, unsure. "You scared of me?" he asked. "No, sir." "You should be," he said, voice dry as dust. "But I'm not the kind that leaves kids by the side of the road." He walked to the truck, opened the passenger door, and waited. Maggie looked down at her doll. Her cheeks were still streaked with tears and dirt. Her stomach hurt from crying, but she walked toward the truck. When he lifted her into the seat, she didn't pull away. She held Clara tight and let her legs dangle. The seat smelled like leather and sun. Chuck handed her a bottle of water from the glove box. "Drink slow." She did. The truck rumbled to life. The tires turned back toward the highway. He didn't ask for details, didn't ask for explanations. He just drove. "You ever ride in a truck before?" he asked after a while. "Only in the back," she said. He nodded. "Ain't right. You ride up front now." The sun was hanging low by the time they turned off onto a gravel road marked by a weathered sign, Twin Canyons Ranch. A long fence ran beside the road posts, leaning like old men in the wind. Cattle grazed in the distance. A windmill creaked against the sky. The house came into view, last plain, 2-story white paint, flaking at the corners, but clean and lived in. "Is this your place?" she asked. "It's home," he answered. When they pulled up, a woman stepped out from the porch. She wore a blue apron speckled with flour, and a braid hung over her shoulder like a rope of silver. Her eyes went first to Maggie, then to Chuck. "She looks half-starved," Isabella said. "She's been left," Chuck said. That was all. Isabella didn't ask anything more. She just stepped aside and held the door open. Inside smelled like bread and soap and something warm. Maggie sat at the table. Isabella poured stew into a bowl and slid it toward her. Chuck filled a glass with cold milk and set it beside the spoon. Maggie picked up the spoon with shaking fingers. She took a bite, then another. The broth burned her throat a little, but it tasted like safety. No one spoke while she ate. No one pressed her for answers. After the bowl was clean, Isabella led her to the bathroom. "You wash up best you can. You'll find a nightgown on the hook. You can sleep in the quilt room tonight." She looked down at Clara. "Don't worry about her," Isabella added. "She's earned that dirt." That night, in the soft light of a bedside lamp, Maggie crawled under a thick quilt stitched with blue stars. She laid Clara beside her head on the pillow. The house creaked. A dog barked far off. Somewhere downstairs, Chuck was closing the front door. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I got found." The first light in Twin Canyons didn't come from the sky. It came from the sound of boots on old pine floors and the clink of enamel mugs meeting wood. The rooster took its time, but Isabella didn't. By the time the sun cut through the lace curtains, the stove was hot, coffee was on, and biscuit dough was already being worked with the heel of her hand. Maggie lay still for a while, wrapped in that starry quilt, like it could hold her together. She listened to the hush of the house, the calm way it breathed. No doors slammed, no harsh voices, just the soft murmur of grown-ups living. She sat up slow, brushing the sleep from her face. Clara was still beside her, same as last night. Maggie ran a finger over the threadbare cheek, kissed the spot where the other eye used to be, and whispered, "We're safe here." Downstairs, Chuck glanced toward the stairs as he poured himself another cup. Isabella had already set a second place at the table. "She'll come when she's ready," Isabella said. "She don't strike me as skittish," Chuck replied, voice low. "Just bruised." Isabella nodded. "The bruised ones don't show it right away. They hide it deep." When Maggie did come down, hair wild from sleep and arms tight around Clara, she didn't speak, just sat where the plate was waiting. Isabella slid over scrambled eggs, toast, and a peach cut into slices. "Eat slow," she said. "Ain't no rush." Maggie did. That became the rhythm. The ranch moved at its own pace, steady, honest, demanding, but fair. Each morning, Maggie rose with the light and followed Isabella into the kitchen. She helped measure flour, fetched eggs from the coop, learned how to knead dough without punching it like a fist. The old woman didn't explain much, just did things slow, let Maggie watch. Eventually, Maggie's hands knew what to do without being told. After breakfast, Chuck would tip his hat and say, "Let's go." Maggie would pull on her boots, still 2 sizes too big, and follow him out to the yard. The corral fence was tall and silvered with age. Horses stood inside like statues until they saw Chuck. Then ears perked, tails flicked, and heads turned. He didn't raise his voice, didn't snap commands, just moved with purpose, calm and sure. Maggie noticed the horses listened better that way, and they listened to her too eventually. Her first try brushing one of the geldings ended with her covered in hay and a bruised shin. Chuck walked over, hands in his pockets. "You okay?" Maggie sat up, lips pressed tight. She nodded. He offered her a hand. She took it. "Don't push your weight forward next time," he said. "Horses don't like it when you lean like you're scared. Stand solid." "I thought I was," she said. "Well, think again," he said, and gave her shoulder a firm squeeze. "Get up, kid. Try again." He never coddled, never scolded, just steadied her with a hand and let her find her footing. Some afternoons, Chuck brought out the worn canvas pads he used to train with in the army. "Self-defense ain't about fighting," he told her. "It's about knowing you can." He taught her how to shift her weight, how to block, how to duck. Maggie practiced slow at first, awkward and hesitant. But over time, her feet remembered. Her body found balance. One day, after catching her footing clean and planting a soft punch to the center of the pad, Chuck smiled. "You got fire," he said. Maggie looked at him unsure. "That's a good thing," he added. "Means you ain't finished yet." At night, under the glow of a lantern by the table, Isabella would read aloud from a worn paperback. Then she'd slide it to Maggie and say, "Your turn." Maggie stumbled over words, got letters twisted, sometimes grew frustrated and shoved the book away. Isabella didn't correct her, didn't scold, just sat there sometimes humming, sometimes just being still. On the nights when the dreams came, the ones where she saw Eliza's face twisted in contempt or her mama fading into smoke, Maggie would wake up shaking. She'd find Isabella sitting in the hallway with a cup of tea like she'd been waiting. Not a word would pass between them, just a hand on her back, and that was enough. Chuck and Isabella didn't ask about Eliza, not directly. They didn't ask what she said or how long it had gone on, but they knew, and Maggie knew they knew. Everything came from Isabella's idea. "We don't have a proper photo," she said one evening while kneading dough, her sleeves rolled up and her braid tucked under a scarf. "Not one of us all together." Chuck looked up from the newspaper. You mean like a portrait? Exactly. I saw old Mr. Grady's family one at the post office. Everyone clean and smiling. Thought it was time we had ours. Maggie, who had been sitting near the wood stove brushing Clara's hair with a broken toothbrush, froze. She didn't say anything, but her hand stopped moving. 2 days later, Isabella laid out clothes for each of them. A checked dress for herself, clean denim for Chuck, and a soft blue calico dress for Maggie that had belonged to a neighbor's daughter years ago. She'd mended it herself. When the day came, they drove into town to visit a small studio tucked between the feed store and barber shop. Maggie walked slow behind them, holding Clara close. When they stepped inside, the photographer waved them toward the backdrop, a painted barn and field. Isabella stepped into place. Chuck stood beside her, one hand lightly on her shoulder. Isabella called gently, "Come on now." But Maggie didn't move. She stood by the door looking down at the dress, then at the floor. Her voice was barely there when she spoke. "I shouldn't. I don't belong in that picture." Chuck turned his brow, furrowing but not angry. "Why do you think that I'm not yours? Not really. I'm Apache, and y'all ain't." Silence fell for a long breath. Then Chuck walked to her slow and easy. He crouched down so his eyes met hers square. "You listen here," he said, voice low but sure. "Family ain't about who shares your blood. It's about who shares your heart." Maggie looked at the floor again, shoulders tight. Chuck reached for Clara, gently adjusting the doll's crooked bow. "This little one got just one eye, half an arm, and still sleeps next to you every night. That means she don't belong?" "No, sir." "Then neither do you." He stood, offered his hand. Maggie hesitated. Then she reached out and took it. They stepped in front of the camera together, and when the shutter clicked, the flash caught Maggie mid-smile, soft, uncertain, but real. That photograph ended up framed in the hallway at Twin Canyons. Later, it'd be printed in magazines, clipped into articles, and mailed to people Chuck never even met. But on that day, it was just for them. So Chuck brought her along. At first, Maggie didn't understand why folks kept staring, or why cameras clicked every time she reached for a napkin or tied her shoe. She tugged at Chuck's sleeve one afternoon as they left a fundraiser. "Why are they watching us?" Chuck grinned. "Well, guess you're famous now." "But why?" she asked. "I didn't do anything." "You lived," Isabella said softly from beside her. "And you let the world see it." But fame came with questions. At one benefit dinner, a well-dressed woman leaned across her table and asked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "Is she yours?" Chuck took a sip of coffee. "She is." "Oh," the woman blinked. "But I thought you and Miss Isabella just got engaged. I didn't realize you had children together." Chuck didn't flinch. "Some families are born. Ours was built." Still, the whispers didn't stop. "She don't look like them. Where'd she come from?" "I heard she's part Indian." Some folks meant well, others didn't. Maggie heard it all. And late one night as Chuck tucked her in, she whispered, "You don't gotta keep saying I'm yours, you know." Chuck looked at her long and hard. Then he pulled the covers up under her chin and said, "I don't say it 'cause I gotta. I say it 'cause it's true." One afternoon, not long after Chuck came home early from town, a brown paper sack under his arm. He didn't say much, just led Maggie to the sitting room and popped a tape into the VCR. It buzzed, clicked, then opened with a grainy image of a man fighting off bad guys in a desert. Guns blazing, kicks spinning, explosions behind him like firecrackers on the 4th of July. Maggie watched wide-eyed. "Who's that?" she whispered. "That," Isabella said from the doorway, "is your Chuck." "No, it ain't," Maggie said. Chuck chuckled. "It is. Was. Long time ago." As the scenes rolled on, rescue missions, fights in alleyways, heroic one-liners, Maggie's mouth hung open. "You're a real hero," she said. Chuck scratched his beard. "Well, pretend one mostly. But sometimes pretend matters." She didn't say much after that. Just watched the movie all the way through, even the credits. Later that night, when she sat on the porch steps watching the sun drop behind the hills, she turned to Chuck beside her. "You don't gotta be fighting bad guys to be a hero," she said. He looked over, one brow raised. "You just gotta not leave the ones that need you." Chuck smiled, leaned back, and said, "That'll preach." From that day forward, Maggie walked taller. At events, she wore her boots proud, held her head high, and always kept Clara close, just a reminder of where she came from. People still asked questions, but she stopped worrying about the answers. She had one. "My name's Maggie Hart," she'd say, "and this is my family." One quiet evening after dinner, Chuck turned on the small black and white television that sat in the corner of the sitting room. A show came on reruns of a talk program featuring community stories. Isabella sat knitting. Maggie sat cross-legged on the floor, Clara in her lap. Chuck watched for a bit, then said, "They do segments sometimes. Good people doing right things, helping strangers. I know someone who works with them." Isabella glanced over. "You thinking what I think you are?" Chuck nodded. "Might be time folks saw what kindness looks like." "Not everyone's ready to be seen," Isabella said, looking down at Maggie. Maggie looked up. "You mean me?" Chuck rubbed the back of his neck. "Only if you want to. You ain't gotta speak if you don't want. But your story's worth telling. It might help someone." Maggie looked back at the screen. A woman was talking about building a free kitchen for farmhands out of work. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sure. "Maybe," Maggie said. "Maybe I could try." Chuck didn't smile, just gave her that slow nod again, the one that meant more than a grin ever could. A week later, they filmed it. No studio lights. Just a crew that came to Twin Canyons with cameras and long cords. The producer asked Maggie if she wanted to rehearse. She shook her head. "I'll just say it." She sat on the porch steps, Clara in her arms, and looked straight into the lens. "My name's Maggie. I'm 8. I used to live with a woman named Eliza, but she didn't want me. Said I wasn't hers. Said Apache blood ain't clean." She paused, took a breath. "But Chuck and Isabella, they don't care what blood I have. They just care if I help wash dishes and feed the hens and do my readin'." Another pause. "I ain't scared no more." The crew stayed silent for a few beats after. Then they packed up, nodded thanks, and left. A few weeks later, the segment aired. It was short, 3 minutes. But people noticed. The phone rang. Letters came. Someone from the state called, asked if they could visit. Not to check up, just to talk. And then came the papers. Magazine clips, headlines. A photograph of Maggie on the porch, sun in her hair, Clara in her lap. They called her the girl Chuck Norris saved. Isabella frowned when she saw it. She saved herself. Chuck nodded. But folks don't sell papers on quiet truths. The story spread, and so did invitations. A local church asked if Maggie would speak at a youth event. A veterans group wanted Chuck to come talk about compassion and service. They didn't say yes to all of it, just some. Maggie never said much when she stood up at those events. Just told them what happened. Told them she was okay now. Sometimes people cried. Chuck would stand at the back of the room, arms folded, watching. Not proud, exactly. Just present. That was enough. Life on the ranch didn't change much. The cows still needed hay. The porch still creaked. Isabella still made the biscuits too crisp on Sundays. But Maggie had changed. She stood straighter, spoke clearer, laughed even. And some nights when the moon was high and the wind carried the smell of mesquite and dry hay, she'd sit under the stars with Clara beside her and whisper stories about the mother she barely remembered. Then she'd close her eyes and whisper, "Thank you," like someone was still listening. Because maybe someone was. But in other town, "You see this girl smiling on the cover?" Eliza's voice cut sharp through the stale air of the Dallas corner store. She was dressed better than she used to lipstick, now hair dyed stiff blonde, coat clean and pressed like it meant something. In her hand, a glossy magazine with Maggie's picture front and center, grinning shy beside Chuck and Isabella. "That's my stepdaughter," she said, tapping her nail on the page. "She's out there playing family with a cowboy like she ain't got one of her own. Like she wasn't mine first." The clerk didn't answer, just rang up the coffee and gum she'd tossed on the counter. But Eliza wasn't talking to him anymore. Her mind was already spinning faster than the ceiling fan overhead. She hadn't thought about Maggie in months. Not since she left her beside that road outside Amarillo with nothing but a doll and a heat rash. But now, with her on TV, on church programs, in papers with headlines like "Apache Girl Finds New Family with Action Star," suddenly, Eliza felt the sting. Not guilt. No, that wasn't her kind of burden. What she felt was loss of control. Because Maggie had become something, and not under her name. 3 days later, Eliza sat across from Cyrus Graves, a lawyer slicker than a grease trap. His office was downtown, windows-tinted desk bare, but for one black fountain pen and a brass clock that ticked like judgment. His voice was low, slow, the kind of tone that made people sign things they shouldn't. "You're saying you gave up physical custody but never terminated legal guardianship," he said, thumbing through the old county papers. Eliza nodded. "She's still legally mine, far as I'm concerned." Cyrus leaned back. "You want her back because you love her." Eliza stared, eyes hard. "I want her back because she's mine, and I won't have her prancing around like some TV orphan making me look like a monster." Cyrus smirked. "Paperwork's old but workable. We'll file an emergency petition. Appear unannounced. Give 'em just enough rope to tangle up in court." And so they did. It was a Wednesday when the black SUV rolled up Twin Canyon's dirt drive tires, cracking the gravel like bone. Maggie was out front sweeping the porch. Her braid was tucked under a borrowed ball cap Clara tied around her shoulder in a makeshift sling. She didn't hear the SUV at first, not over the wind, or the soft scratch of her broom. But when the door slammed shut, she looked up, and everything in her body froze. Eliza stood there, sunglasses perched on her head, face pulled tight like a drum skin. Behind her, Cyrus stepped out, briefcase in hand, like it carried the weight of the world. Maggie took a step back toward the screen door. Chuck came out from the barn gloves, still on shirt, damp with sweat. He wiped his hands on a rag, narrowed his eyes, and walked straight to them. "You lost?" he asked, not smiling. Eliza straightened. "I've come for my stepdaughter." Chuck glanced at Maggie, who hadn't moved. "She don't belong to you," he said plainly. Cyrus stepped forward, opening his briefcase. "Legally, she does. This is a reassertion of standing guardianship filed 2 days ago with the county court. You'll find the judge's stamp." Chuck didn't even look at the paper. He stepped in front of Maggie, hands still loose but squared calm as a ticking fuse. "She was left on a roadside," he said. "You didn't lose her. You discarded her." "I did no such thing," Eliza hissed. She wandered off. "I went looking." "You didn't even file a missing child report," Chuck said. "Don't lie to my face." Maggie stepped out from behind him. Her knees trembled, but her chin was up. "I heard you tell me to stay there," she said, voice small but sharp. "You said I wasn't yours. You said Apache kids don't belong in white homes." Eliza flinched just slightly. "You don't understand what I meant." "I understand," Maggie said. "You were glad to be rid of me." Chuck looked down at her just a second, and something passed between them, quiet and sure. Then he turned back to Cyrus and Eliza. "You want to take her?" he said, voice flat. "You'll do it through court, with me sitting across the aisle." Eliza tried to smile. "That can be arranged." Maggie spoke again, louder now. "I'm not going with you." Eliza's smile cracked. "You're 8. You don't decide." "She does now," Chuck said. "She's got a voice here, and if a judge's got ears worth anything, he'll hear it." The day of the hearing, the small-town courthouse was near full. Not for spectacle, but out of something heavier, respect. Word had gotten around. Not just the headlines, but the truth folks carried from one porch to the next. Maggie sat between Chuck and Isabella. Clara held close in her lap. Her braid was neat dress, simple but clean. She didn't fidget. Cyrus stood first. He talked about legality, about Eliza's rights, about the temporary nature of Maggie's time at Twin Canyons. He used words like unauthorized custody and undue influence. When he finished, Eliza stood. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue and said, "I always wanted the best for her." She ran off. I was scared. I tried to find her. Chuck's turn came. He stood slow, hat in hand, and spoke without notes. "She was left on a roadside," he said again. "Not wandered, not lost. Left." He turned toward the bench. "Judge, I didn't pick Maggie up looking for attention. I didn't take her in for headlines. I took her in because she needed a place and I had one." He paused, glanced down at Maggie. "She doesn't need me to speak for her, though. She can speak now." The judge, gray-haired, lean sleeves rolled halfway up, nodded. "Maggie, he said you may speak if you wish." Maggie stood. She didn't tremble. "My name is Maggie Bell Hart. I was left on the road by Eliza. I remember what she said. She said, 'You ain't mine. You're just some wild Apache.'" Her hands tightened around Clara. I cried for her to come back, but she didn't. She turned slightly, looked at Chuck and Isabella. They didn't ask where I came from. They just made me dinner. Let me sleep under a roof. They taught me how to read, how to ride, how to stand up again. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I choose to stay. Not because it's easy, but because it's mine. Silence filled the room like dust in a still barn. The judge cleared his throat. "I've heard enough," he said. "In the matter of custody of Miss Hart, I rule in favor of the Norris household. This child stays where she belongs." Eliza stood too fast. Her chair fell backward, clattering across the floor. "You can't do this. I am her legal." "You were the judge," said calmly. "Now you're not." Cyrus closed his briefcase jaw tight. Chuck reached down, took Maggie's hand, and squeezed once. "You did good, kid," he whispered. Maggie looked up at him. "Thanks for staying." He smiled. "I ain't going nowhere." That evening back at the ranch, the porch light glowed soft. Supper was over, dishes clean. Maggie stood out under the stars again, wind tugging at her braid. She didn't hold Clara. She didn't need to, not tonight. Inside, Isabella was folding linens. Chuck sat at the table, hat off, eyes on the girl who once cried into gravel, now standing firm on her own land. Somewhere between yesterday and today, she'd stopped being a guest. She was home, and even shadows couldn't change that now. The sun had dipped low behind the hills, turning the sky to a kind of worn gold, soft around the edges. The wind stirred the cottonwoods near the fence line, the dry rustle of leaves mixing with the faint creak of the old porch swing. Maggie stood out there, bare feet on cool wood, her hand resting against the rail like she was feeling the land breathe underneath her. The same land that once held nothing for her now felt solid beneath her toes, steady. Inside, Isabella folded linens fresh off the line, the scent of sun-warmed cotton clinging to them. Chuck sat at the table sipping lukewarm coffee, his eyes resting on the girl through the window. There'd been a lot of changes lately. He didn't much like change, but this kind, the slow kind, the kind that came from healing, from choosing each other day after day, that kind he could stand. He glanced at the gold ring on his finger, still new, still catching the light just right. Then he looked toward the stairs where little Jack had dropped one boot halfway up, and Emma had left a trail of buttons like breadcrumbs from her sewing basket. Family used to be something he figured was for other men, not ones like him who carried war in their bones and silence where conversation ought to be. But now, it filled the place. The house was never quiet, not really. There was always a pot simmering or a rooster too eager in the morning, or Maggie reading out loud to Emma with her steady little voice trying to sound out the bigger words. Chuck liked that sound. It meant something was working the way it should. After the wedding, they hadn't gone far. No big trip. Just a ride up to Willow Bluff, a picnic basket packed by Maggie, a few hand-carved words etched into the old oak there. Nothing grand. But it felt real. It was real. The wedding had taken place under that courthouse oak, the one that cast wide shade like it knew how to bless things. Chuck had worn his good jacket, the one he only brought out for burying friends or watching births. Isabella wore a plain dress and a soft smile that hadn't left her face since the judge said "I do." Maggie, in her best boots and a ribbon braided into her hair, had held the rings and stood proud between them, one hand on Clara, the other tight in Chuck's. When the papers were signed and the last words spoken, Maggie didn't cry, but she looked up at Isabella and whispered, "Now we match," and that said enough. Back at the ranch, life started fresh but familiar. The rooms weren't bigger, the days weren't longer, but the house felt fuller, as if the walls themselves had widened to hold what had grown inside. Jack had just turned 3. He was the kind of boy who ran before he looked, who talked in half words and full volume, who clung to Maggie's leg like she was some kind of tree trunk in a storm. She didn't seem to mind, not when he drooled on her shirts or when he tugged her braid just to see what she'd do. He reminded her of something rough and unshaped, maybe how she used to be. Emma, 6 years old and full of questions, followed Maggie like a shadow. She wanted to ride when Maggie rode, read when Maggie read, and even practiced kicks behind the barn when she thought nobody was watching. Chuck saw her one evening mimicking Maggie's stances with all the concentration of a preacher on Sunday. He didn't say a word, just let her be. That's how lessons stuck best. Maggie took to being a big sister like it was something already stitched in her bones. She taught Emma how to feed the hens without getting pecked, and how to comb out a horse's mane without missing knots. She taught Jack to count with dried beans and to say "please" before tugging for a second helping. And every night after both were tucked in, She sat by their doors for a while, just listening, just making sure the dark didn't carry the same weight it used to. Chuck started letting her lead when they went into town. Not for errands exactly, but to talk with folks, help at the feed store, show she was part of the family. Nobody said much, but the way folks nodded to her now, the way old Mr. Carter handed her a nickel for tying his grain bags, that meant something. In a place like this, it didn't take big speeches to be seen. It just took time. Not long after the court ruling, a local pastor asked if Maggie would be willing to visit the small community center in nearby Red Hollow. They'd heard about her story, maybe from the TV spot, maybe from the paper. They were gathering kids, the kind who had lost folks or didn't have steady homes, just to talk. Nothing fancy. Maggie wasn't sure at first. "I ain't much for speeches," she said to Chuck one morning while brushing the bay mare out by the fence. "You don't have to be," he answered. "Just show up. That's what matters." She did. The first time she stood in front of a group of 10 kids, half of them too busy picking at their sleeves to look up, she only said one sentence. "My name's Maggie, and I know what it feels like to be left." That was all. But afterward, one girl, a tiny thing with sleeves too long and socks that didn't match, came up and sat beside her. Didn't speak, just leaned a shoulder against her. That's how Maggie knew it worked. From then on, she went back every couple of weeks. Sometimes Chuck came too, sometimes not. Isabella packed sandwiches and cookies in wax paper. Maggie taught the kids how to stretch, how to plant their feet, how to keep their hands up without looking scared. Not to hurt anybody, just to know they could stand tall if they had to. She didn't call it self-defense. She called it standing up straight. That was enough. Back at the ranch, Clara stayed on her shelf, still missing one eye, still stitched with the same brown thread along her belly. Maggie didn't sleep with her anymore. Not always, but sometimes on nights when the wind reminded her too much of the road, or when Eliza's voice came slinking into dreams uninvited, she'd reach for her, pull her close, and breathe deep. Isabella never asked. She just made sure the shelf was dusted, that the old doll never got shoved to the back. One evening, as the light dipped low and the world turned the color of burnt honey, Maggie sat on the porch rail while Chuck fixed a loose board. She watched the horizon. "You think Mama would have liked it here?" Chuck didn't look up from the hammer. "I think she'd be proud of who you are." Maggie was quiet a moment. She used to hum when she cooked, little songs in Apache. "I can't remember the words no more, but sometimes I think I still hear the tune." Chuck nodded. "Songs stay even when the words don't. Like fences. You remember where they stood even when the wood's gone." She smiled soft and small. Then, after a pause, "You think I could teach Emma some of those moves we do?" Chuck looked at her the way he always did before saying yes, like he wanted to make sure she meant it. "She's your sister," he said. "Teach her what you know." Maggie grinned. For the first time in a long while, maybe ever, she felt sure that what she carried wasn't just memory or pain, but something she could pass on, and that meant more than anything. Hey y'all, if you've made it this far in the video, first off, thank you for staying with me. I want to take a moment to share something from the heart, just like a friend sitting with you on the porch after a long day. This story, Maggie's Road to Home, ain't just about a little girl getting rescued. It's about what happens when someone finally says, "You matter." It's about healing, not just from wounds you can see, but from the ones folks carry deep in their chest. Chuck didn't save Maggie with a punch or a stunt. He saved her by not turning away. And that, to me, is the loudest kind of love. What gets me the most is how quiet the kindness is in this story. Nobody's showing off. Nobody's trying to be a hero. They just do the right thing, slow and steady, one meal, one warm bed, one hand on the back when the nightmares come. That's the kind of goodness that sticks. And Maggie, she's proof that your past doesn't have to own your future, that even if you were thrown away, ignored, or called less, then you still get to choose who you become. And you can become more with the right folks beside you. So if this story moved, you taught you something, or reminded you of someone in your life who changed everything just by staying, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what part hit home for you most. Let's talk about it. Let's make this not just a story, but a conversation. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time. Stay kind, stay strong, and don't forget, sometimes the quietest love is the one that saves you.